What's going on YouTube? WestHobbiesRC. So today we are back with the SAB RAW 700 Nitro Build. So in this video we are going to just do an overall build on the RAW 700 Nitro. So we are going with the BK 9001 HVs on cyclic, 9005 HV on tail. We will be running the BK servo horns, of course, X-Guard backplate sensor for RPM governor, X-Glow. We are running the OS 105 non-regulated and the new ProTune 105 V2 pipe. We will be setting this model up and flying it on V-Bar Neo or V-Bar Evo, not sure which one yet. So let's go ahead, crack this box open, and let's get started. Our transmission assembly, our pulleys on, we got our servo mounts. Now we're about to mount our cyclic servos. Now, since this is a nitro, I do believe firmly in running the rubber grommets and the mounts. Now, the reason for that is vibration. Coming from old school days, it helps prolong the life of the servo, and I know our servos are better now. But the grommet orientation is very important. Where these brass inserts are, you got to pay attention to that, because the flat part of the brass insert is made to go against the mounting surface. So our flats are against, the servo goes in this way, our screws from the back side with those carbon plates. And that allows the servo to be sandwiched and allow the grommets to do their job of actually isolating a little tiny bit of the vibration. Now the servos are still solid, they're still hard mounted. There's minimum movement in the actual servo, but on a nitro machine that is very important to help prolong the life of your servo. On these BK servo horns for your 18 millimeters from center hole, they have it marked 15, 18, 21, so you go to your center hole. So that is cool. So let's go ahead and get the balls on the servo arms and the servo into our main transmission assembly. Got the servos mounted to the transmission assembly here, and then we got our frame sides mounted right here. We got all of our nuts in, Loctite, everything is down and secured. And then now we just started on the head assembly. Now on your linkages, from the swash plate to the blade grip, remember one side is left-handed thread, one side is right-handed. So the side that is farther away from that hole is going to be left-handed. So this side, the side that's closer to the hole, is right-handed. So went ahead and got these done at 63 millimeters overall length. So now we're going to start assembling the head and get that tossed on to the main jet. Installing your head dampeners, we're running 90-90, and then we have our outer ring. Make sure that the lip is facing out. There's a flat side and a lipped side. You want the lip towards the blade grip, flat side towards the O-rings. So if you're going for softer flying, you're going to do a 70-90 on each side for your O-ring. So 70 first, then 90. If you're going to be pushing the helicopter harder, you would do 90-90 on both sides. So now we went ahead and got our head block ready, and make sure you lube all your O-rings with micro lube or any type of lubricant that you like, as long as it's not petroleum based. So now we're going to go on and do the blade. Head assembly is complete, ready to go on the helicopter, and our swash plate is all Loctited and everything is tightened down. Now, one thing I do, a little tip, is I do not install the anti-rotation pin yet. I will slide the swash plate down, get the head on, and then come back. So that way, when your swash plate is into place, you can maneuver it around and not have to fight that pin. So you can just slide it through, Loctite, you're good to go. So micro lube the shaft, let's get the head tossed on. Ahead, got the lower frame sides, our decals on, got everything tightened down on our head assembly, so it all looks great. We got our belt tensioner and rails in. So now we can move on to the skids. Now just remember, a lot of these screws on the lower frame sides go into a lock nut. So they're gonna go into a lock nut like that right down there. So do not use Loctite on these screws on the lower frame. And also don't Loctite your transmission screws in yet that holds your motor and transmission assembly. Not your motor, but your transmission assembly. Because once we mount the motor, we can put the belt on, and then we can pull this back, slide it forward and backwards to tighten the engine belt. So just don't Loctite these yet, but make a note, go back and Loctite them later. So let's move on to the skids. Got our skids ready to go. We got all of our bolts Loctited. Remember, lock nuts go inside facing each other because the bolts go from the outside. Set screws are started. And then now we're just going to, we already cleaned these. Make sure you clean with rubbing alcohol before applying your stickers. So now we got to apply, these are the little front mounts for the canopy. Get stickers on that, and then we can put it all together onto the frame. We got all of our screws in and no Loctite because all of these guys go into lock nuts. Now this front bar here, you have a lock nut on the front hole, and then this back countersunk screw does get Loctited. You can add a little M3 screw right here to help keep this aligned. So now all that's left is to measure your skid pipes. So I always go by the back, get an equal, so that way both my skid pipes are equal. And we just have to tighten 2 set screws on each side, and then we can start on the clutch assembly. While getting ready to install the engine, I went ahead and removed the head, and that is for a reason. So you get your gasket, your engine comes equipped with a 0.2 millimeter head shim. Now, if you're running 15% nitro or less, then you can leave the 0.2 millimeter shim. If you're running 23 through 30% nitro, it is recommended to add a 0.2 or 0.1 shim. Now we're going to be running 30%, so we're going to leave the 0.2 and then add a 0.2. So that way it is easier for the higher nitro. You don't have to be as sensitive on the needle. If you're a little lean, it's okay. You're not going to risk melting a piston. If you run the 0.2, you can run 30% nitro, but you got to be very, very easy on that needle. If you run it just a little lean, you will burn it up. So I'm going to add a 0.2 on top, so we're 0.4 millimeter head shim now. Put it back together and let's get it ready to be mounted. When installing your clutch assembly and your pulley and everything, which we have here, we have our engine crank, which that's going to slide down. You make sure you add your shim on the shaft before you go ahead and slide that in, but it is important to somehow lock the crank into place. Now, I've always done it too, where I take the carburetor out, use a toothbrush, put it in, lock it down. A lot of you guys don't like that. Here's another option, is a crank locking tool. Now this is a 3D printed one, and all I did different was I kept shearing the tabs off of them. 3D printed ones, you can buy them, but I did this to solid infill. So this is a solid piece of 3D printed plastic, and it fits down inside of our crank here, locks everything together once you push it down, and then you can go ahead and tighten your clutch assembly up. And remember, when installing your clutch assembly, don't ever put Loctite or retaining compound on these threads, but of course, or on these threads, but you will Loctite your 2 little grab screws once this goes down, because that threads into place. So let's go ahead and get this assembled. Engine assembly is all together. Everything is ready to go in the helicopter now. We're going to add our backplate sensor here. Now, if you're going to be adding a magnet pickup sensor, you would epoxy your magnets into your clutch bell or into your flywheel, depending on where you're putting your sensor, but we'll be running an X-Guard backplate sensor. So now we're gonna go ahead and make sure you add your belt before putting your engine in. So now we're gonna get the belt in, get the engine tossed in to the helicopter. Engine and shroud assembly is all installed in the main frame. Our belt is tensioned properly. So now I did not do the throttle servo yet because I forgot we need to order 1 more servo. We only ordered 3 of the 9001s and a 9005 for the tail. So we have to order 1 more servo, and then I can do the throttle linkage and everything, but we can move on now. So now the next step is going to be, I believe, setting up the tail, get the tail boom mounted, and we can move on to the tank. So let's go ahead and set this aside and start building the tail. So we ended up getting our throttle servo. So we did not start the tail yet. We got the throttle all situated and finished up. Now, on nitro helicopters, it is very important for your throttle geometry, just like on your cyclic for your servos. You want your throttle servo to be centered straight up and down on the arm, and you want your carburetor throttle arm to be straight up and down. If you look inside right here, you will notice that there is a mark set. So this all the way back is carburetor fully closed, and then you'll notice there's 3 marks right here. So we are set at the center mark, that is complete half throttle. So now we know our carburetor is 50% half throttle, our arm is straight up and down, our servo arm is straight up and down, and our linkage is adjusted correctly. So now we have a nice and even throttle range throughout the servo movement. So now we can move on to setting up and building our tail. While building the tail, make sure, of course, you micro lube all of your bearings, Loctite, and retaining compound. Now, I did have somebody ask me and said, why do I put micro lube on the feathering shaft or tail shaft when building the tails or the heads of the helicopter? And on the tails, for example, you will notice that the bearings are open. They are not a sealed bearing. So that grease, the micro lube, gets pushed into the bearings and helps grease the tail bearings. Now this side is open as well, so any grease you can get down in there, the better the bearing will live and be happy. Of course, everything greased and lubricated is a lot happier. So we're gonna go ahead and build the tail end. Tail assembly is now completed, got the boom mounted. So next is mounting the tail servo, and we are using the BK 9005 HV. So we're gonna go ahead and get that mounted. Tail servo is installed. Remember, this is a nitro, so we decided to run the rubber grommet. We have our ball at 18 millimeters from the center of the screw to the center of the ball. So now we can move on to putting the tail boom clamps. Tail boom is mounted, belt is tensioned. Now I see a lot of people ask about how tight should your belt be. So your tensioner should be pretty much flush with the frame side. Now depending on how you like your belt, you should have some tension to it where you can hear it, but it's not so tight you could play a guitar string on it. You want that tensioner to do its job and tension the belt. So you want it to be about flush with the frame side. So now we are going to get the third bearing block in and start on the fuel tank and fuel lines. The fuel tank mounted, got our muffler on, got our fuel lines ran. You'll see my little trick right there. I put a little piece of fuel line tubing over the tubing to act like a clamp. It cannot pop out. Flybarless unit is done and installed. So now we are going to get the V-Bar Evo put in place, antennas mounted, and start wiring all this up. Our V-Bar Evo mounted, and we started wiring up the helicopter. So we split this wiring into two portions, as you can see here. We have a left side and a right side. So the left side is all of our servos and RPM sensor. So we have two different servo plugs that I put here. This one is for the backplate sensor. This is for the throttle. We still need to cover this wire in heat shrink. We'll mold it and tuck it real nice and neat through here. And then this wire, so on this side, this harness is our 3 power leads. Since this is a nitro model and there is no HD port, I don't like to plug my LiPo 2S power directly into one lead. So I split it. So we have 12 gauge wire, and then it gets split into 3 ports. So we have our power distributed through 3. And then auxiliary 1 is our lead that runs all the way up to our onboard glow. So I'm going to get all this taken care of. Let's finish the wiring up, and then we are ready to put the side covers on. Wiring is completed. So we got both sides done. We got our wire cover here. We have to cut it, of course, with all nitros because they're really long, so you have to trim them down. So we have our RPM sensor goes down in between the frame to the bottom plate. Our throttle comes up. Heat molded around with double-sided tape down to our servo, our onboard glow. Our plug goes down to here to the plug itself. And then our lead going to the FBL unit comes up, wraps through to the other side, and comes through to this part of the wiring. So let's flip this thing around. Kind of get a better idea now. So that is the 2-part harness of the wiring to our tail servo. Come across again. 3 leads going into 12 gauge power wire. This will be for our LiPo power. We have our 2S 2250 inside this little box here. This box will go onto here with bolts, and then you can plug your battery in and out. This is our lead going up into our onboard glow system. So I think the wiring came out pretty clean. I'm happy with that. Lots of wires on a nitro, but it looks good. So let's get the battery box on and just finish up a couple little things. SAB RAW 700 Nitro is completed. We put some polish on that ProTune V2 pipe. Got a lock nut on the backside of the ball link for the throttle. Frame protector for our fuel lines. We got our 2S 2250 LiPo on the side cover here. Helicopter balances perfectly. Our XT60s for power, so we just plug our power lead in. We also have frame protector here, some of that SAB canopy protector just to stop the fuel lines from being rubbed against the carbon. Fuel shutoff valve, fuel clamps to make sure the lines can't pop off. So it is all wired up, set up, and ready to fly. So I want to thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you haven't already, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Remember, Patreon and PayPal are linked in every video description if you'd like to help support me. Take care and have a great day.